So when you start designing a Wi-Fi network, you need to ask some questions. And the first question is, how much time do you have to design, install, configure, test, and optimize the system? And you need to know that maybe, depending on the scope of work, you have to train people to use the Wi-Fi, and you have to set up a help desk or train the customer's help desk to manage the Wi-Fi. And so you need to ask your client how much time they need. You need to ask your client when they expect you to deliver a fully working system and see if that's feasible. Because the client may have unrealistic expectations, and you need to be able to come back to them and say, hey, this is not possible. You need more time. And one of the considerations is, if you're deploying a network of thousands of access points or voice over IP phones or computers, the manufacturer may not have stock in the product that you need, and so you have some lead time in terms of being able to even acquire those components. And of course, the second question, which may also be the first question, is what is the scope of work? Yes, you're designing and installing the Wi-Fi, but are you responsible for wiring up the system? Are you responsible for pulling Cat5e or Cat6 or fiber? Are you responsible for configuring the equipment? Sometimes a customer's IT department is responsible for the configuration. Are you responsible for training people to use the system? Are you responsible for maintaining the system after it's been built, or is that the manufacturer's responsibility or the customer's responsibility? And finally, are you responsible for deploying additional devices like barcode scanners, voice over IP phones, computers? And to what extent will you be configuring and maintaining and training those devices? And then you need to figure out which areas in a building need coverage. Are you covering a single floor, a warehouse, a large building, many buildings, a campus, a football stadium? Because this affects the time frame and the budget, especially if you're running new wire. And in older buildings, it's even worse because you're running cable in a building that might be 20 or 30 or 50 years old, and there are all kinds of complications that you don't even know about yet. Now, is this new construction or existing construction? If this is a brand new building that doesn't exist yet and you're responsible for installing the Wi-Fi, then you'll be working with the general contractor. And the general contractor is the person who is responsible for building the building. And of course, it's one of the things that we'll talk about later is how to survey a building. And that means going in there and taking measurements and figuring out where all the components of the system go. It's a lot harder to do that with a building that doesn't exist yet. So with existing buildings, you need to consider the fact that your installation will potentially disrupt the customer. And what I mean is, let's say you're installing Wi-Fi in a shopping mall. There are guests walking around the shopping mall. They're going to be in your way. Or rather, you're going to be in their way. And you need to plan this out. Now, the next question is, does a client require you to use a specific brand or model of equipment? So if the client, say, they've already got Wi-Fi in part of their building, and it's Cisco, and their whole network is Cisco, they may insist on you using Cisco access points and Cisco switches, or they may have already decided on, let's say, Aruba or something. Sometimes a client hires an outside consultant who figures out what they need, especially, let's say, a government agency. A government agency may have gone to an IT consultant, and the consultant says, hey, based on your needs, this is the system that you need to install. And then the government agency goes back and puts out an RFP and tries to get some bids on their system. And obviously this is going to affect costs and deployment times. I have seen, I had a client who not only insisted on the exact type of access point, they spec'd it down right to the brand of cable that they wanted to run in the walls. And who are the users and what do they want? Obviously not up to them, but we need to know how many users or devices we have in the system, because that can complicate the design. It affects the type of technology. More users means more equipment, and we need to figure that out. We'll talk more about that later, of course. And what is the client's budget, and is it approved already? You know, a client has some things that they want, but maybe they don't actually know how much it's going to cost. If they're not experts in Wi-Fi, they've not thought about all of the underlying structures and the amount of labor it would actually take. So communication with the client is very important here.